We are currently experiencing one of the most dominant starts to a season in the history of Formula 1. Red Bull have won every single race, being 7 in a row, and have taken 1-2 finishes at 4 of them. All in all, Formula 1 at the front is very boring. But that doesn't mean Formula 1 is boring, because we are currently witnessing one of the most exciting fights I've seen between 3 teams in a long time. Let me explain. Basically, for the past 10 years of Formula 1, we've had a very familiar distribution of teams. There's the top 3 of Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes, with Mercedes only really having true dominance. But definitely not so much true competition for the championship, as it was always Mercedes pulling away and winning titles from around 2014 to 2020. Then you would get the very packed and competitive midfield of at least 5 teams, and finally 1 or 2 teams known as backmarkers that make up the back end of the grid. However, now 2023 has given us a different distribution of teams, and it's pretty exciting. We've got the usual one team dominating the sport, being Red Bull. Then from 5th to 10th, there is a pretty close general scrap, with maybe Alpine leading the way and AlphaTauri or Williams bringing up the rear. But one novel aspect we have is the fact there are 3 teams fighting for second, whereas before it was only 2 teams. This is because Aston Martin have leapfrogged their midfield competitors and bridged the gap to the big 3 of Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari. And so now we have 4 teams essentially consistently fighting for podiums and possibly wins. Of course, Red Bull are far ahead of this scrap, however it's certainly a welcome sight seeing Aston Martin join the fight. So in this video, let's break down this fight for second in the standings between Aston Martin, Ferrari and Mercedes, and see what's going on and how things could play out moving forward. Let's begin with Ferrari. They started as the strongest, being the closest rival to Red Bull. In fact, they were almost equal in qualifying to Red Bull at the start of the season, as they challenged for pole and succeeded at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, with Leclerc beating Max to pole. However, while they had good qualifying pace, their race pace has been comparatively much worse. Essentially, they struggled with unpredictability in performance in different parts of the race, and even found the car acted in different ways, even on the same tyre and setup. They then brought big upgrades to Barcelona, more in the direction of Red Bull to solve this, but the same issues prevailed. The core issue is they don't have an understanding of how to improve, and therefore cannot capitalise on their package, which is arguably the second best package on the grid, because they don't know the root cause of the problem and therefore cannot make changes that are meaningful. To put it simply, they need to seriously scratch their heads to turn things around. Therefore, they aren't really seen as a serious threat for Red Bull at the moment. Next up is Aston Martin. They are the new entrant into the consistent podium takers in F1, breaking into that top 3 for what seems like the first time for a fair while. And they are arguably the most consistent team of the 3, taking 5 podiums in 7 races, thanks to Alonso's consistency and serious pace. They actually have more podiums so far than Mercedes and Ferrari combined, with Mercedes and Ferrari collectively having 4 and Aston Martin having 5. However, they do face issues as they only have one strong driver, Fernando Alonso. Now, Lance Stroll hasn't been completely woeful this year, but there is clearly a serious divide between the two, and you could definitely argue if there was a more qualified driver in that second seat, that Aston Martin would have a much higher points tally than they do. Their second limitation is they generally have less resources and expertise, so they may naturally dip off as other teams bring bigger upgrades. Spain showed this deficit compared to other teams, where Mercedes and Ferrari brought brand new upgrades and arguably leapfrogged the better performing Astons. And so you could say it was the weakest weekend for Aston Martin of the season so far, and there are definite fears this could continue. However, they do still have ambitious upgrade plans for the season, and still have a strong package all round. I would say there is maybe reason for concern, but by no means panic. Then there is Mercedes, who are definitely the most inconsistent of the 3. They had a terrible start to the season with serious deficits in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. But they were gradually improving up to Australia, which was a very strong race for them. In reality, they were almost challenging Red Bull. But it was clear the reason for this was purely the track characteristics, and so then Baku and Miami were very underwhelming with serious deficits all round, and they even struggled to make Q3 on a couple occasions. Then they released the heavily anticipated upgrades in Monaco. Now, while they were not representative due to the track layout, they did have a pretty decent race, showing good promise. But Spain marked a major moment for Mercedes, where they were clearly the second quickest team on the grid. This is because they found the perfect tyre window with cooler track conditions playing to their strengths. But most importantly, the new specification of car will be learning very quickly, and so they can optimize quickly as they go along, bringing new upgrades as the season progresses and slowly closing that gap to Red Bull. All in all, Spain was a very good test of what makes a high-performing car, and therefore it was a good sign all round. But it's expected that their inconsistency will continue, with some tracks suiting them and others not so much. So basically, the natural inconsistency of Mercedes and Ferrari has given us unpredictable standings at each race, with Aston Martin surprisingly being the ones to come through on top. The different design philosophies from all three teams means this inconsistency and unpredictability of where these teams stand will most likely continue throughout the season. However, what is likely is we'll see Mercedes and Ferrari be consistently quicker than Aston Martin as the season progresses. This is because Aston Martin simply don't have the ability to bring upgrades quickly, but they do have new facilities on the way soon, with their wind tunnel becoming operational for the 2025 season. But for now, they may just have to wait. Now, between Mercedes and Ferrari, my bet is on Mercedes, as they clearly have a direction and idea for where their car wants to go, whereas Ferrari seem lost. However, based on quali pace, there is definitely promise for them if they sort out issues. And so if they can get on top of these issues, they can definitely be a strong outfit. But all in all, it is great to see that these three huge teams are fighting so closely. Yes, it's not for race wins, but this is a good sign that once these teams get a proper grip of these regulations, that they should begin to challenge Red Bull. And so, in that case, my money is on Mercedes, as we know what they are capable of given their complete dominance of Formula 1 for so long.